Hi, everyone. My name is Greg Corcoran. For those of you who don't know me, which is probably most of you, I was born and raised in New Jersey. I'll skip the rest of the intro because we're on a time crunch, but suffice it to say, I went to college, medical school, and completed residency in emergency medicine, just like everyone else. I did complete a fellowship in administration, so at the end, during the Q&A, feel free to ask about that. The reason we have decided to hold this seminar for you is because we have all become aware of the challenges facing the graduating emergency medicine residents for this year and possibly future years. There's no sugarcoating it. COVID-19 has wreaked havoc on the job market. With that, the world of emergency medicine has changed significantly. For this seminar, we have brought together some extremely talented individuals who can help you navigate this new landscape. Some of our speakers will talk today about helping you to traverse the stormy waters of emergency medicine at this time, while others will speak on some out-of-the-box ideas to thrive and succeed in the current environment. We hope that by the end of this seminar, you have the tools you need to prepare and execute a plan for your own personal success. I want to thank Lauren Myers for putting this together on such short notice and for helping us get such tremendous speakers. I also want to thank residents Brittany Caesar, Eddie Egan, Mark Berenson, and Shivani Adiyaru for helping Lauren and I put this together. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. Dr. Mark Rosenberg is the president of NJ-ACEP. His term began in October 2020. He served as the president of NJ-ACEP from 2015 to 2016 and continues to serve on the Public Policy Committee. Dr. Rosenberg is the chair of emergency medicine at St. Joseph's Health in Paterson, New Jersey. He also serves as the hospital's chief innovation officer and led the development of the nation's first alternative to opioids program. Dr. Rosenberg was first elected to ACEP board in 2015. He also serves on the board of directors for the Emergency Medicine Foundation and on the National Pain Management Task Force of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Dr. Rosenberg earned his medical degree from Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine and is certified by the American Osteopathic Board of Emergency Medicine and the American Board of Emergency Medicine in emergency medicine and hospice and palliative care. Speaking more personally, Dr. Rosenberg is a true servant leader who represents the field of emergency medicine with passion, vigor, and always has the best interests of our specialty in mind. His list of accomplishments do little to demonstrate his humility and his dedication to doing the right thing. His presence at this seminar is just another example of that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Mark Rosenberg. Mark, I think you're muted.
Of course I am. Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it. I try to be muted every time just to keep my record up of doing it every single meeting I'm at. Let me see if I can pull out my slides. So thanks for this opportunity and thanks for that great introduction. And I was talking to Lauren just before this started, and we really decided that I'm going to make this a little bit shorter, not leaving out a lot of facts, but make it a little shorter so I can really hear questions from everybody who's on the call. I always am accused of being a little too optimistic. This is very desperate times. This is a real challenge, but I really do believe that this will give us an opportunity to make the specialty better. But we have to get through these rough times first, and at the end of this, I'm quite comfortable to say that we're going to be in pretty good shape. And I will explain exactly why I'm saying such crazy things right now. Let me move on to 5 years ago. Pre-pandemic, emergency medicine was really a hospital-based practice, but there's no plan in the country to increase hospitals. We were seeing 151 million emergency department visits a year. So let's look at some data. If an emergency room physician sees 2 patients per hour and works 36 hours per week, they're going to see just short of 4,000 patients a year. Now, some docs work more, some work less, some are faculty, some are administrative. But if we take the fact that we have 151 million visits and we divide that by the number of hours, 4,000 hours or 3740, what we find out is that we really need 40,000 emergency physicians to staff the country. ACEP alone, which doesn't incorporate all the emergency physicians, had at that time, 5 years ago, 36,000. Now it has 41,000 members. So just by the membership alone, that's enough to staff our nation's emergency departments if everybody worked full-time, just working clinical. Full-time meaning 36 hours a week. So Paul Keevala was our president at the time, and he said, you know what, we need to go back and really look at emergency medicine as a specialty. And what is our future like if we're not building more emergency departments? We're tied to bricks and mortar. What's going to happen? So as we did this, we realized that the specialty of emergency medicine is really dealing with acute unscheduled care. The other thing that's really important is in your hospital, if you look at the number of gastroenterologists, there's no exclusivity. There can be as many gastroenterologists who join the medical staff. But emergency medicine has something that's called exclusivity. There's only one group in each hospital, for the most part. There's some that have more than one group, which is crazy. But so we only have one group, and we only have so many patients that are coming in, and we only have so many hospitals. So we developed the workforce. So then came the pandemic, and the pandemic really accelerated the future, and it did because we initially had a 42% volume drop. Currently, nationwide, it's somewhere between 18 and 23. We really can't get a good handle on it because different areas have a little bit more patients than others as far as how close they are to their pre-COVID numbers. Part of the problem was we came out with public safety announcements, not only ACEP, but also the government, HHS and the CDC, saying stay home, don't go to the emergency department if you have COVID, stay home, put on a mask, don't contaminate other people. Also, there was fear that you would get contaminated if you went to the emergency department because you would run into somebody who had COVID. So this is just showing how many patients we were down and just documenting it, the fact that it was 42%, just an amazing decrease from 2.1 million to 1.2 million during the time frame of the first wave. And this is just looking on a graph what had happened. So the top line that you see that goes all the way across is 2019. Compare that to 2020, and it's everything that we know during the time period of January 1st through May 30th. We started to see this huge dip. And if we look at age groups, we see that the largest decrease in volume was in the 0 to 10 and 11 to 14 age group. And that really accounts for why our peds emergency departments were down over 60%, some places as much as 80%. Many children's hospitals closed during this whole period. And you know most of this, but more happened that was really disruptive. We had decreased revenue at each hospital site, mainly the emergency departments. So the only way to stay open was either to consider decreasing pay, looking at how the workforce should work. Should we decrease number of doctors who are on? What should we do? Many people lost their job, and many lost hours, many lost their contracts, especially new physicians. We know all this. I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but it's critically important to realize that this was global across all of emergency medicine and other specialties as well. So now let's talk a little bit about the workforce and the job market and what has developed, we hear a lot of people saying this is all because of the mid-level practitioners, this is because of different emergency departments, and fingers are being pointed at the contract management groups or the PAs and nurse practitioners who not only want independent practice, but are multiplying like crazy. Talks about too many residency slots. But the big question is, will the volume come back? And even if it does, it doesn't change the future. It just changes the timeline. And will kind of flatten the curve, as we heard so much with COVID. We won't feel this tremendous pressure if our volume comes back. And now there's a lot of talk about urgent care centers. Have they been taking our volume? And there's no evidence to say that this is a problem because of urgent care centers. In fact, many of them were closed or cut hours during COVID. There's a lot of talk about telemedicine, that took away our volume because private practice is doing more telemedicine and making themselves more available, and therefore people aren't coming to the emergency department. And there's a lot of talk about distribution. Currently, the best data I have is that there's not a supply and demand mismatch right now. But if I talk to many of the residents, it sounds like there is. It's hard to find jobs, but it's harder to find the jobs in the area that you want to work. But there are jobs available in rural America, for instance, and other places. So this is a little bit part of the study. This is the first slide of the presentation, which is not really public yet, but I wanted to steal some of the information and present this to you. This will be made public April 6th and April 9th are two big meetings to really identify solutions. This really identifies more the problem. But this was a projective study looking for physicians' demand through 2030. And we wanted to do it with the entire House of Emergency Medicine. So we looked at many, many organizations who joined. Others have not joined, but are joining now because the data is so robust and going to be, at least it'll define the problem. Hopefully we'll be able to come up with better solutions, which I will talk about today. The goal of the study was supply and demand for emergency medicine physicians through 2030, and looking at just varying scenarios of how we can correct the problem moving forward, or at least make sure that we're looking at the number of residents going into emergency medicine and also the volume increase that may happen in emergency departments as it has year after year after year. So we got a lot of data inputs, and I'm not going to go through all this, but this is valid data sets from the AMA, from Medicare, and also some interviews from ACEP members and emergency medicine residents and fellows. So let's look at the supply side. So this is how many providers we have to take care of the patients that come into our emergency department. And when we looked at this, the study identifies these percentages that you see on the pie chart, where you see emergency medicine physicians at 70+%. Realize that this is people who said they were an emergency physician, even if they were family practice trained and they were working in rural America. So they declared themselves as emergency physicians. So it's an important concept to, well, let me go back to that. You also see the number of PAs, the number of nurse practitioners, a really significant portion of the pie. You see family medicine, 4.2%, and internal medicine as well. And as I said, a lot of this is based on Medicare patients that were seen with emergency department codes and the AMA database, and combining those to come up with the distribution of, here it's mainly Medicare emergency medicine service providers. This is interesting, and this is something that every resident who's on the call feels, but this is the growth of residency graduates from 2008 to 2020. And you see, and this is historical, so we look at the middle column, ACGME plus AOA, and then on the right-hand column, the growth year after year over year of residency growth. And so we see obviously a big increase on percentage basis up to 2020. And then if we extrapolate where we think we're going to go with residents who are already in the program, and how many slots are available, we really think we'll continue to have a significant increase of residents. Now, I want to comment here what this means. It looks like this is a potential solution to cut the residency programs or to do something about that. But realize the ACGME and the RRC only accredit or recommend for accreditation those hospitals that have started residency programs. If they meet the criteria, then they can have residents. I want you to also realize that a residency program in a hospital who has no residents is called a virginal hospital, and they are able to develop new residency programs and do that, and they can have as many slots as they want because they are a new hospital. Medicare will give that to them, and each slot that they have that they fill, they get significant reimbursement for each resident. Plus, they get indirect Medicare payments that increase their Medicare per patient that's a Medicare patient so that they make even more money there. So part of the impetus is now for hospitals to generate residencies to increase their revenue. This is just not for-profit hospitals. This is many hospitals across the country who do not have any residency programs. They're the ones who can start one. If we look at the growth of non-physician providers, and this is just looking at 2012 to 2018, and looking at non-physician providers, we're really looking at PAs and nurse practitioners, we see that growth that we all know about and feel as we're seeing more and more. If we look across the country, more and more nurse practitioners and PAs are getting independent practice. Maine just opened up independent practice for PAs. But the main reason they did that is their legislator needed to do it because they did not have enough physicians to staff their emergency departments. And so what happens is they now have PAs that are independent, working and running rural emergency departments. And you can imagine being a single PA on and all the trauma and all the sick patients you can deal with, even though the volume isn't so great. These PAs really are in need of some support systems, and many of them just want physicians to come in. But many hospitals, many states across the country have given independent practice to nurse practitioners as well. And if we look at the demand for emergency department services, we had a big decrease in 2020. But if we looked at our trend line, we have about a 4% increase of ED service needs every year over year. On years when we have a very high flu volume and the viral load is high in the country, we tend to have higher volumes than in times when we have less. This is unprecedented what happened during COVID. You all know this. And that 42% decrease that we saw from COVID really sent shivers up every hospital CEO's spine, because the emergency department is a place where a lot of the admissions come in, a lot of the surgeries come in, and a lot of the revenue is generated. So this had an impact on them. So what the hospitals are doing are, there's this imbalance between revenue that's current during the pandemic and revenue that was expected prior to the pandemic. So here's the big question, and this is everything that I showed you on the supply side is really what has already happened. If we think about it, it is very, very difficult to um, to stop PAs and nurse practitioners from going to schools and graduating. It's really impossible to get them to stop working in emergency departments, especially those who are already working emergency departments. We can change their name and say they can't use the term resident, but in Ohio, the nurses who have advanced degrees, and many have doctorate degrees, are now calling themselves Doctor of Emergency Medicine, and that has been approved by the state legislature that they can. So we do have those issues that are upsetting to the public, but does not change the demand equation. So anesthesia had the same problem. And their problem happened originally 20 years ago when they started having nurse anesthetists come in, and nurse anesthetists demanding that they have independent practice. Right now, there are nurse anesthetists that are in surgery centers that are licensed to give, and they also have a doctorate degree, and they call themselves doctors of anesthesiology. So what they have done to increase their caseload and their number of patients and to preserve their residencies is they differentiated themselves into critical care medicine. A lot of palliative care is being done by anesthesiology. They went into pain and pain management, which really was the big savior for them. I met with the anesthesiologist last night, and they were going over all this with me. Pain really saved them. Coming up with the pain programs and pain protocols, anesthesia really wanted to own that, and it increased their volume so much that they were unable to manage all the pain that was coming in. They also do sleep medicine. If we look at radiology, this was a long time ago, probably almost 30 years ago. Radiology had the same crisis, but part of their crisis was the fact that there were so many graduating residents in radiology. But they really went into fellowships and they subspecialized into a lot of different radiology subspecialties, radiation oncology and interventional and neuroradiology. And so radiology really got out of their crisis by expanding their knowledge base and growing. Internal medicine, if you go back a lot of years, internal medicine really was one specialty. The subspecialties that we see really took a long time to take hold, but as there were more and more doctors, they developed more and more subspecialties. And the problem now is the cardiologist still has to take internal medicine boards, but doesn't know internal medicine anymore. So what they did is they switched their career completely. Everybody who we're talking about no longer is doing their basic entry level boards and study. They have now differentiated themselves into a different specialty. Even though it's under internal medicine, it has separate boards and a separate specialty. Emergency medicine has its opportunity to differentiate, and we're starting to see more and more residency programs across the country have fellowships in different areas. And here's a list of many of them. And I want to point out cruise ship medicine. Cruise ship medicine is an interesting field because the docs who are doing cruise ship medicine get accredited in it, and they take off 1 to 3 months a year just cruising, doing cruise ship medicine. Now, you may not think that's a whole specialty unto itself, but that's 3 months of physician labor that is removed from the competition to fill emergency medicine slots. Mental health in California, many emergency physicians, this is not a big trend, have opened up mental health urgent care centers and that are mainly run by emergency physicians. So there's a lot that can happen. Event medicine, I know 2 physicians, and one of ours from St. Joe's, Greg Somerville, only does event medicine now. and he does it with Grand Prix racing. And Ryan Stanton is splitting his time. 1/3 of his time is spent with NASCAR racing. Also, we had a summit for the future of emergency medicine, and this was during the pandemic when our volumes were really down. And there was a lot of talk about telemedicine, and Jefferson has started a tremendously successful program using telemedicine and really experimenting a lot with a whole digital transformation and using machine learning and artificial intelligence to really start seeing some of the minor cases that can come into the emergency department. In New York, the Cornell started a program, and they do some very nice things. Instead of having, they do it in their emergency department. They have, if you've ever gone to ShopRite and you can do self-checkout, they have the similar type of thing. There's 4 exam rooms that only have a computer and a camera in it, a printer and a camera, and you go in, and after you get triaged by the nurse and she says you're capable to go in there, and there's a doc in their telemedicine hub who sees them and discharges them, prints their instructions, and that's the end of their visit, kind of all self-serve for the patient. They're seeing about 6,000 patients a year doing this type of thing, but they're seeing 6,000 additional patients because of the increased capability that they have. And I already said that an ED physician sees between 3,000 and 4,000 patients a year. This gives us opportunity to expand our footprint, obviously. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. We have some that are doing mobile emergency medicine, and we're seeing this again in Colorado and some other places in the big cities, where instead of being an ambulance, it is emergency physicians riding around with a team and going to individual emergencies. We're seeing geriatric emergency medicine being done in geriatric centers and nursing homes and the like. So we're seeing a lot of push to bring the care right to the patient. And what we do know also is that we always looked at emergency medicine as bricks and mortar. We are emergency physicians. We don't need to be tied to bricks and mortar to practice our art. And so we have the opportunity to do that in the nursing home, and maybe not us, but from a command center doing telemedicine and having a paramedic go in there and see the patient, or a nurse, or use the nurses that are already in the nursing home. So a lot we can do, and so much more I can talk about, but I really want to cut this short. I want to talk a little bit about some subspecialties. We know that emergency medicine has differentiated formally with palliative care and pain and addiction. Even at St. Joe's, we have a couple emergency physicians who have gone into palliative care and don't practice in the emergency department anymore. And through ACEP, I know many others who have switched to different roles in medicine that their emergency medicine allowed them to do. And one more thing about the future of emergency medicine. We are specialists in acute unscheduled care. So any way we can expand what acute unscheduled care is, there is public demand for it. They don't want to wait 3 weeks to see their family doctor. They want to be seen now. And that's what we do better than anybody else. So rural emergency medicine, we're working with the ACGME to see if we can get a waiver for emergency medicine residents to do rotations in rural areas to really learn what that art is and what that skill is, so that they feel more comfortable being out there. The problem that we have is as an emergency medicine resident, you have to work with a board certified residency trained emergency physician. And since rural America frequently is staffed by family practice or internal medicine docs who are very good emergency physicians, we still can't train our residents with them. Um, but a lot of people don't like rural emergency medicine because you don't want to live out in Montana, you want to live in New Jersey. But a lot of people have started doing more of a locums type thing where they'll travel out to rural America where they can make almost $100,000 more than working in the New York City, northern New Jersey area. Over $100,000 more a year in many of these areas because they're so stressed out and they just don't have the resources that they need. But the real question is what can we do with telemedicine in expanding our footprint? And rural hospitals really take up 17% of the population and 12% of the hospital admissions. And what's important to know is rural America is in every single state, has some hospitals that are under-resourced and really function as federally qualified centers and also as rural hospitals. So what is my recommendation for you as people looking for a job? Real important, look for your job early. When somebody gives you an offer, can take that offer. It will not be there tomorrow. And there's not a lot of offers that are out there. It's tough right now. I know one doctor who got a job in New Hampshire and said, I really don't want that job. Had trouble finding the job where he wanted to work and ended up going back to New Hampshire and the job was gone. Be flexible. Remember one thing for sure, it is easier to change your job than it is to change your residency. You can't change your residency. But with your job, you can, as soon as you start a job that's not your dream job, you can start looking for your dream job. You can start looking where you want to ultimately be. And maybe you want to work at St. Joe's and maybe something will open up and you're on the list and you've already expressed your desire to be there and maybe you'll be offered the position. But remember, a lot of people will batch their shifts and travel from where they want to live to where their job is. Work there 3-4 days, maybe have an apartment there, maybe the hospital will put you up, and then you fly back home. Not saying it's ideal, but you need to land a job that you feel comfortable with and want to work at. And then we'll talk a little bit more about telemedicine and urgent care in a couple minutes. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the workforce report. The formal report, the manuscript is being written and reviewed, and then this will be presented. The manuscript of everything I just said, but in great detail, will be presented to the presidents of all the organizations that I had listed in the beginning, and individual representatives from each organization. And then they'll break into different groups, 2 groups looking at the supply side, 2 groups looking at the demand side, and they will come up with a series of solutions that will be presented at a 3rd meeting. The date's not announced yet. And they will really focus on how do we decrease the supply? What do we need to do with residencies to make them fit into the new paradigm? Or what do we do with non-physician providers? And what can the ACGME do? We need to really look at the demand side and do some of the things that anesthesia may have has done and what's our future. And what haven't we thought of? I really believe that there's a lot of opportunity out there that we need to work on. As Greg said in the beginning, this is real. We got to deal with it. It's not going away. But I do believe that we have enough smart people that are working on this that we will come up with significant solutions and, more importantly, action plans to deal with this. I believe at the end of the day, we are going to be a stronger specialty at the end of this. And I really do believe uh, we will have a great livelihood and a great career, but I think it's going to be a little bit different than what we're thinking of right now. And but be patient and realize that this was going to happen probably by 2030, no matter what. The difference is that the crisis feels more intense now because of what happened with COVID and the volume decrease. So I'm going to stop there. Lauren said I can't go past 25 of, and I'm just a minute or two late. And I want to turn this back to Greg. But thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rosenberg. I really miss being able to hear the applause after something like that, and I think that if we could hear the applause right now, there'd be a very resounding applause for that talk. That was really fantastic. Our next speaker is Dr. Mark Meredith. Dr. Meredith was born and raised in New Jersey. He finished residency in emergency medicine in 1981. He's board certified in emergency medicine. Dr. Meredith is the senior director for the American Board of Emergency Medicine and is an active volunteer for the board. He has practiced in New Jersey since 1981 and is currently working in urgent care. He has also been an owner of urgent care facilities. Mark is a fantastic person who is always looking to help out our colleagues in emergency medicine. He's an experienced emergency medicine trained physician who has seen the landscape of emergency medicine change throughout his career and has adapted to that. He is a phenomenal resource for you, and I'm honored to have him speaking at this seminar. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mark and look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, great. Thank you, Greg. That was very nice. And Mark Rosenberg, great talk. Thank you for your insights in all of this. So I've been doing this for a while. I've seen a lot of changes. I think this last 12 months for all of us have changed our personal lives for the foreseeable future, and certainly have changed our professional lives, and probably more so for all of you residents. It's great to see such a great turnout on this Zoom call. So I hope all this you find to be interesting and useful. About 8 years ago, I transitioned from emergency medicine into urgent care. It was really prompted by an unanticipated contract change. But I had been practicing emergency medicine in New Jersey at 2 different locations, so fairly stable work situation. And during all of that time, there was always a demand and a need for physicians at our practices. And that's continued up until just recently. Mark gave you some of the statistics about what's going on, and some of the same things are happening in urgent care. We're starting to see the job market be flooded, and a year ago or year and a half ago, if somebody came looking for a job, we probably had a position for them. That's not the case these days. Some of it's related to the location, whether it's North Jersey or South Jersey or near the New York area. And some of it is in preparation for the future, not knowing what the future is going to hold. In urgent care, like emergency medicine, the spring of last year, most of us saw a pretty significant drop in our volumes. And that related to a change in our staffing patterns and providers and the rest of the staff. And then we started doing COVID testing. And when COVID testing started, our volumes escalated. We were up probably 50% over our highest volumes, and that's continued through to this week. The distribution of patients that we're seeing today is certainly different than what we saw back in beginning of 2020, and certainly prior to that. Prior to the beginning of the pandemic, I would say that you would see in an urgent care center almost anything you might see in the emergency department. We didn't take ambulance calls, so we weren't seeing major trauma. But we saw a wide range of critical patients. I mean, it was not unusual almost every week to have somebody with an acute MI walk into our office. We've had cervical fractures walk in on a fairly regular basis. We see individuals who turn out to have pulmonary embolism. And I think the difference in urgent care has been that you don't have all of the ancillary testing that you have in the emergency department. There may be very limited point of care testing. There's plain x-rays, but most centers don't have ultrasound, CAT scans, MRIs, a variety of blood work that you would use in the emergency department. So you really needed to use your clinical acumen to determine who was sick and who wasn't sick, who you could treat, who you could watch, who you needed to send on to the emergency department. And, you know, for me, it was kind of getting back to my roots of making decisions based on my clinical findings and not depending on ancillary testing. I can remember when we installed the first CAT scanner. So early in my career, we didn't have CAT scanners, we didn't have MRI, and it was amazing the limited blood studies that we used to make decisions. So you really had to base things on your history and your physical exam of the patient and make a decision when to admit them, when to call a consultant, or when you could treat them and send them home. You know, currently, I think most of what we're seeing in urgent care is COVID testing, unfortunately. I think that will eventually go away. You know, we will get back to the normal things that we have seen. We, like the emergency departments, have seen our pediatric population fall out dramatically. You know, we don't see kids anymore with otitis media. You know, I don't know, they don't have it, or they're not going anywhere, or they're just getting by. But what we're seeing has really changed, and probably will continue for some time in the future. I think Mark's opinion is that we need to diversify ourselves, is right on target. We as emergency physicians are adaptable. We're quick on our feet. You know, when we're in our practice, on our shift, we deal with whatever comes in the door. You know, we put together what we know and what we've experienced, and come up with a way to manage that patient. And I think in our careers, we need to do the same thing. We need to not have all of our eggs in one basket. And, you know, one option for you is urgent care. You know, other options, telemedicine, you'll hear about, and, you know, some of the other subspecialties that exist. And, you know, maybe, you know, having your hand out, working part-time at other sites or other locations rather than just your full-time job is helpful, so that when something unexpected happens, you have some way of dealing with that. You know, I think the landscape of medicine has changed. It was changing slowly. The pandemic has pushed that along faster. Telemedicine has really come into itself, and, you know, I think will continue. Urgent care is with us to stay. I don't think it's going to die out like it did back in the 80s. You know, I think how patients get their care is changing dramatically. And as Mark had said, I think, you know, one of the next steps we're going to see is care going out to patients, whether getting back to the old practice of home visits or the paramedicine that's being developed in some locations. But the old way of everybody comes to the emergency department, I think, has changed, and I think it will continue to change for the next several years, and probably throughout your career. I think how we provide healthcare to people is going to be different as we move forward.
Hey, Mark, just wanted
Yes.
to interrupt you for a second. Sorry to interrupt. Lauren just notified me that we have about a minute to wrap up right now. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of wrapping things up over the next minute.
Yep, I was actually just coming to an end. I will be hanging around for the questions and answers. I wish you all well, and thank you for attending.
Mark, thank you so much for coming and speaking at this. It really, truly is an honor to have you here. And I think that urgent care is a great option coming out of residency, even if there are no jobs available or if you're interested in that specialty as well. So our next speaker is going to be Dr. Devin Unadkat. Dr. Unadkat received his medical degree from New York College of Osteopathic Medicine and a master's degree in health administration and policy from New York University. He completed his ER training at Long Island Jewish Medical Center, Albert Einstein College of Medicine, where he was chief resident. He served as the assistant emergency residency director and as assistant professor at a major medical school in the New York area. And he has spent more than 10 years caring for patients in various settings, including urgent care, observation units, freestanding ERs, academic trauma centers, and community hospitals. He's board certified by ABEM and is a fellow of the American College of Emergency Physicians, and he is currently the chairman of a major emergency department in New Jersey. Devin's accomplishments speak for themselves, but on a more personal level, I can tell you that his star is still rising. He has a stellar reputation in emergency medicine and is also a fun guy to grab a beer with and go out on the town. Devin is an out-of-the-box thinker who has been able to thrive in an adverse set of circumstances throughout the pandemic, and we are incredibly lucky to have him speaking here for us today. And with that, Devin, I'll let you take it over.
Hey, thanks, Greg. I appreciate that introduction. Hi, everybody. Like Greg said, I'd be happy to grab a beer with you guys once all this pandemic stuff and quarantine business goes away and talk more in detail. I know we have a limited amount of time, so I wanted to just quickly go into why am I talking about telemedicine. Greg gave you my background. He did say I'm the chair of an emergency department in New Jersey. I used to be the chair of an emergency department in New Jersey. I used to be the chair of Jersey City Medical Center for the past 5 years or so, served in that role, but recently resigned from the chair position, still work in the emergency department, and am working full-time as the chief medical officer for a telehealth company called Station MD. That company was founded by myself and 3 other emergency physicians. And we founded the group about 5 years ago, prior to what Zoom meetings and FaceTime being like the standard of communicating. We felt that it was important to, so I've always been interested in taking care of vulnerable populations and people that were underserved that potentially could not get access to high quality care, specifically acute care and unscheduled care. Listen, we all know if you make a lot of money and you have connections, you can get your healthcare taken care of. That's not a problem. But the people who don't have access to the care, don't have insurance, maybe can't speak for themselves, maybe have some sort of disability, maybe are elderly population that can't go and advocate for themselves, they're generally the group of patients and people that are at highest risk for complications and issues and generally don't get the care they need. I felt, and myself and my partners felt, that telemedicine was the way to do it. Like getting that home visit or doing that home, the old school, like going to your house, the doctor in the 1950s, knocking on the door, taking care of the entire family. We felt like the technology was there about 5 or 6 years ago to perform that same level of attention and high quality care and deliver that medical care to the population that truly needs that service. So we started Station MD and we targeted these vulnerable populations, specifically the geriatric population in nursing homes and specifically individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities, cerebral palsy, autism, traumatic brain injury. These folks live in congregate care facilities, whether it be a nursing home, a group home, and are generally taken care of by individuals that either are family members or people who come in and spend their entire lives caring for people with disabilities and such. They also have a lack of access to high quality care. These guys can't just get up, get in their car and drive to an urgent care. They can't go to the emergency department. They depend on other people to get them that medical care. So what we do is we work with these folks to provide telemedicine on-demand care for acute issues that arise. Now you can imagine somebody who walks around in a wheelchair, maybe has a limp, and I know you've seen individuals with autism and cerebral palsy come into the emergency department. The amount of trauma that these individuals have to go through to just get into through those doors and sit in your ED's hallways while the lights are blinging and the alarm bells are going and things like it, throwing their entire routine off schedule, missing medications, you name it. We call the trauma of transfer when we talk about this whole thing, and it truly is traumatic for our patients. We're saving them all of that by bringing the telemedicine, bringing high quality emergency physicians to their home and trying to diagnose and use the skills and the talents that we've trained in, that we are the experts at. No other physician in the house of medicine is good as diagnosing and taking care of people and in the acute stage as we are. That's what we do. Now, if we can take that skill and talent and bring it to people who otherwise would not get it in their homes and make it convenient, and also be able to provide that high quality of care, we thought that was a good idea. So we did. We started that, and we started small in one borough in New York City. We're now in 8 different states, and we take care of these vulnerable populations. We employ 30 emergency physicians. 3 or 4 of them, actually 3 of them, are full-time telemedicine doctors. But the remainder, including myself, I see patients on the computer. I see patients in real life. I see patients in the ER, I see them in an observation unit, and I see them in their home. I do the same thing in all of those things. I diagnose problems. I just use different modalities to do it. There are things that you can't do I can't put in a central line via the computer, at least not yet. I don't know, maybe sometime in the future that'll happen, but I can't intubate somebody. And I don't think telemedicine is right now, it's not used for that. But the majority of things we do in the ED, I can diagnose, or at least I can say, no, you need a CAT scan, you need to go somewhere. Or you don't really need a CAT scan, you need an enema to make you poop because you're full of stool. And that's why you have that abdominal pain. And I could send a prescription to a pharmacy via electronic prescribing, and their caretaker can give them the enema, and I could check back with them in an hour or 2 to see if they had a bowel movement and just prevent all of that from happening. We were able to do it. Last year, we saw 20,000 visits via telemedicine. We've kept about 80 or 90, about 88% of those patients in place. And I think we've provided high quality care. We have access to the electronic medical records. We do everything via faxes and email and telemedicine platforms. And that's just my practice. There are numerous practices out there that do similar things that target different types of populations. I'm sure you've heard of Teladoc and Doctors on Demand and Amwell. Well, they work through insurance companies to try to provide that same level of care through insurers. Teladoc is just, you don't even need insurance. You just go online, you sign up, and you could see you have a little sinus congestion. They can take care of that. There are different models out there for employment. We work. My doctors work as 1099 independent contractors, and they get paid an hourly wage, whether they see 1 patient or they see 25 patients, right? Well, we don't see 25 patients, but it's not based on the number of patients you see. Another model that many telemedicine companies are doing to reimburse physicians is being paid by the patient they see. So you get paid $20 per patient, $25 per patient. So you're driven sort of like an RVU model to see a high volume of patients. Other models are hybrids of each. Some are salaried positions with some administrative time. The field is growing, and I think obviously COVID has put an acceleration on it. I felt that it was valuable enough to dedicate my entire, resign from my chair position to actually do this. But I do want to emphasize that I think your ability to see patients via telemedicine is augmented by the experience you have in seeing patients in real life. So as a physician that just finished their training, I don't think, and we don't recommend this, we don't hire people in our group that have just come out of residency and do this full time. I do think, though, there's certainly room for you to grow those skills in person, in an ER, full-time or even part-time, 3/4 time, whatever it is, whatever jobs are available, like Dr. Rosenberg and everybody's been saying, take the job, but augment that with some other things that you can do on the side that may in the future become your full-time gig. So I can't tell you as a PGY5, your first year out or PGY4, first year out as an attending, that you should do full-time telemedicine. I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice and the patients that you serve or potentially can serve a disservice. You have a valuable skill. it is needed. I know it may feel like it's not, but that skill is definitely valuable. See people in person in the different settings, whether it's urgent care, observation medicine, freestanding emergency departments, trauma centers, academic, non-academic. Can we do that? But consider augmenting that and diversifying your skills in utilizing telemedicine. You know, we're just one group. Like I said, there's numerous, and I don't want to take up any more of the time. I know we have other speakers and we're kind of cutting short, but I'm happy to meet with anybody on this call on the side and answer any questions and kind of go into more details on what I think the field of medicine, emergency medicine and telemedicine is going to be in the future. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Devin. That was great, and certainly I think there's the telemedicine is only going to continue to grow over the coming years, and that was a great summary of telemedicine and how we can use that to augment our current job, or in your case, carve out a whole other full-time gig over time. So the next part of this is we're going to move to a Q&A. I want to thank all of our speakers today who took the time to talk about, either their specialty or, in Dr. Rosenberg's case, just give us a real great summary of what's going on and what the future may hold. But at this point, I think we can move to Q&A, and anybody who wants to ask a question can just go ahead and, there's a lot of people in here, so I'm concerned if we say just speak up, a lot of people will probably talk at once. Is there a way we can have people raise their hands and we can select people to ask questions, or perhaps we can answer questions on the in the messages? Probably would be the best way to do this.
On the right-hand side of the icons that everybody should have, there's one that says reactions. And if they click on there, they'll be able to raise their hand like I'm doing right now, and you'll be able to see it. And if you go onto the participant list, the people who raise their hand rise to the top. So that's what you should look at, and it should work for you, even though there's 150 people on the call.
Okay, I think that would be a great way to do this. So if you do have a question, go ahead and click the reactions and raise your hand, and one of us will answer it. Also, I do see a lot of names on here of people who may not be speaking, but are attendings and have a lot of experience. And if anybody wants to say anything or add anything to the answers, please feel free to speak up, because there's a lot of experience in this call right now, and I think that there's a lot of wisdom to be shared. Don't see any hands going up right now. Oh, there's one. All right, Eddie, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is just, I'm not in the job market yet. I'm a second year at Hackensack. What's the best way to really go about finding a job? Is it online boards? Is it just knowing a person? Is it cold calling a place where I want to go to? Like, how would you really end up going about it as someone that doesn't know anything about it?
So I'll give a quick answer, and then I'll allow my colleagues to chime in. But the first thing I would say is all of the above. Number one, if there's a place that you have an interest in, reach out to them, because even if they don't have a job now, if that's your dream job, they probably will have a job in the future, and you'll be first in line when they do if you have already reached out to them. Additionally, getting in touch with recruiters, getting into online forums. There's LinkedIn, there's Doximity, all sorts now of ways to search for jobs online. And then I would just encourage you to think outside the box, much like Dr. Unatkat. You just have to keep an open mind as to how you're going to make your living, especially early on. If you want to stay in New Jersey, it may be difficult to find a job in emergency medicine. So keep an open mind to all of your options, whatever that may be.
Yeah, I would agree with the job market the way it is. Do it all, but make personal contact to the ones that are high on your list. I think that's always helpful, but there's going to be other people doing the same thing.
Yeah, and I would also say, Eddie, as a second year, you may not be interacting with recruiters and the like right now, but consider going on Facebook and other social media. They have all these groups out there. Just join the group, just kind of listen to what everybody has to say. So you're collecting information. So when it's your time next year, I don't know if you're in a 3-year or 4-year program, but next year, yeah, you'll have that information. You'll know the right questions to ask your future employers.
Yeah, Eddie, just to mention and give people a sense, the math unfortunately does not look great for people seeking jobs in more desirable areas. So as everybody mentioned, you need to start doing all of that now. And until this point, if you wanted to work in New Jersey, you could get a job. Maybe it was tough to get a job in Vail, but you could promise to do all nights and then they would give you a job. It's all different now. So you need to think about alternatives. Fellowship in particular, I think is one way to differentiate yourself. And I think that people will even have to consider if there's a job in northern Maine or, rural Montana, you may have to just deal with that. This is something we've never dealt with in emergency medicine before, but the laws of supply and demand, we have to follow them as well. And even to the point of international jobs, there's places where they don't train emergency physicians. They wish they had them. People have gone to New Zealand and other countries for years, and that's another option. So I think people have to, get on it sooner than later. Don't wait till ACEP of their 3rd year. You'll be behind the 8 ball.
And, taking a job in a rural area is a great opportunity. I've had colleagues who have done that, and you use all of the skills you've been trained in. You work in New Jersey, especially some of the big centers, the consultants are hanging around all the time. I mean, you're fighting for procedures sometimes. You go out to a rural area, you're the only doc in the hospital, and you will use everything that you've been taught.
And I would like to also just add, first of all, Patrick, great point about, going international or, being willing to be mobile in where you'd like to work. Because, I've had friends who went out and worked in Abu Dhabi for a couple of years and really had a great time doing it. I know that it's not ideal for anybody to want to go out and work in Montana. But what that would do is give you some experience working in an emergency department and put you, again, kind of at the front of the line when you do apply at a place that you really do want to be. And, you'd have some experience at that point, and you can tell them your story about how you went out to Montana because there were no other jobs. And, it's going to make you more attractive in the long term for an employer to hire you. I'm going to move on to the next question here because we spent a lot of time on that one. So Ryan Hawkins asks, anyone have experience working with large ED staffing companies like Envision, Schumacher, Team Health, etc.? Yes, I have that experience, and I think there are a lot of people in this Zoom call right now who do have that experience. Did you have a specific question for us? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask it.
Let me, while we're waiting, there is a lot of talk on social media about due process, transparency, having your less pay, having all different types of complaints or concerns about larger groups. There's also words that are thrown around like contract management groups, private equity. And I think when you're looking for a job in a job market like this, all that matters is that you get a job and you get paid. And after that, you can be picky and look for another job. So I would never turn my nose up to any practice that offers me a job. I would investigate it quickly, kind of like doing a home inspection, and just make sure I kick the tires enough to say, yes, I'll take it. And so right now, my opinion only is that who you work for makes less of a difference than not. It's more important to have a job. There's a couple caveats, however. You want to make sure you are able to get out of your contract, what the termination clause is, and you want to make sure that you can still work in that area if that's where you want to work, so you don't have a non-compete that's regionalized. So, but a couple minor things, but those large groups do not typically have those adverse contracting clauses.
And I can speak to it, if they do have it, it's not something that's enforced for most physicians. It may be enforced for a director, but for a physician who's just there working, they are not enforced. So, you know, I wouldn't worry too much about that.
They were good points, Mark. The other thing to think about is tail coverage. Make sure that you're not going to be responsible for your own tail coverage if you leave in, you know, a year or 2 years. But I mean, the reality is that kind of the mom and pop practice of medicine is disappearing faster than I thought it would. All of us are going to be working for somebody, whether it's Team Health or CVS or Google or whoever it is. You know, the independent practice of medicine is just dying out faster than I would like it to see. And I don't think it's going to recover. I think just the overhead that exists, it makes it impossible for, you know, a small group to survive in this environment.
Yeah, and just one thing to add to that, working for a group like Envision or Team Health that has multiple contracts throughout numerous states, it does open up some doors for you, because remember, these organizations have openings in other hospitals as well. So if you did want to move around and have access to some opportunities in the future, it is a little easier since you're already in the door. And also remember, even pre-pandemic, new residents coming out on average kept their first job for 2 years and then moved forward with a different type of a job or augmented their employment in some way. So don't be afraid just because it's a larger group or a contract management group or whatever whatever you call it. Again, look at what they're offering. Is it the right place for you? Is it the type of job that you're willing to do? And be a little flexible, because it may not be the ideal job for you, but take it, I would say, right now in this market. And then, just understand that in 2 years, you may move on, or a year, you may move on to somewhere else.
I mean, to be blunt, when you're looking at different contracts, you need to know how and if they're exploiting you and how they're doing it. They're hiring you for a reason. What's in that contract, and is that acceptable to you? Everything's a give and a take. You have to know what's in that. So I would strongly encourage you to have somebody actually look at that contract. You're probably not going to be able to change very much of it, but you have to understand what's in it. You have to understand how important is due process to you. How important are these clauses to you? And you can talk to them. You may not be able to negotiate very much, but you should be aware of what's actually in it. And a lot of times it's difficult to interpret. They're written in a very legal way.
That's a great point, Dr. Way. Definitely, I would recommend having somebody, or at least it doesn't have to be a lawyer, but it can be somebody with more experience than you, or somebody who's worked in the field of emergency medicine for a while and has seen a lot of contracts, to look at it for you. But again, I would say, as I said in the chat, I would recommend doing that quickly. And you can ask the employer about things that you have concerns about. Not likely you're going to be able to change it. And certainly I probably wouldn't tell your employer, hey, I'm having my lawyer look at this and mark it up. Not a good look when you're trying to get a job in a tough job market.
Hey, so quick question. Someone unmuted me. Hopefully that's okay. With the job market being so tough now, obviously bonuses are not even like in discussion. Are there expectations for salaries to go down as well? Because we really don't have much of a foothold to hold, like as we're going up against attendings who have been had lost their jobs and they're reapplying for other jobs or relocating for whatever purposes, and recent graduates that are applying. We don't have much leg up on anyone other than we're fresh out of residency. We're really high on our procedure skills. Do we expect that salaries would go down too?
That's a tough question to answer. What I would say is that over the long term, you know, we are going to be facing the laws of supply and demand at some point. And you know, over the long term, I would expect that salaries probably will go down. In the short term, you know, I would say that most groups that I am aware of, at least locally, are not really paying their doctors different salaries. There typically is a rate for a site, and you know, if you get hired at that site, you're going to be making the same rate, whether you've been there 10 years or whether you're, you know, a resident coming out of residency. Obviously, that's different depending on which organization you're working for and which location you're going to be applying to. But you know, just what I would say is I don't think as of right now it has affected that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but I just want to piggyback on that, Greg. I would, you know, when I graduated residency, my mentors have said, you know, pay back your loans the first few years, live like a resident for the first 2 or 3 years of your attending life, and get out of debt. And then eventually, you know, then start to live the life that you want to live, because eventually in the long run, it'll work out for you. And I did do that, and I thought that it worked out well for me personally. In this specific job market, given what Greg just said, I would highly, highly emphasize that. Don't go out and buy like a mansion and pay, you know, $20,000-$30,000 in taxes. Don't go out and buy that big sports car, that fancy sports car that you've always wanted. Hold off for the next 2 years. Let's see where this market goes, because if something changes, you don't want to be put, you know, in a very difficult position. So I did want to emphasize that with young docs out there.
Any other questions? I don't see any other hands raised. Lauren, what time are we supposed to go till?
We are over 15 minutes. So
Okay.
thank you everyone for participating. I didn't want to cut anyone off because I know you had questions. Thank you all. And this will be recorded. I'm going to put it on the YouTube, and I can share the link for all the, you know, those in your program that couldn't participate. All right. Nice day.
Before everyone leaves, if you leave, that's fine. But you know, I just want to let everyone know, if you want to reach out to me, I'll have Lauren send out my contact information at the end of this session to anyone who wants it. You know, I'd be glad to talk with anyone, sit down and talk with anyone about all of this.
All right. Thank you all. And thanks to our speakers. Really appreciate it.